I still remember the moment everything changed. The moment when 6 years of sacrifice, exhaustion, and unconditional love came down to a single envelope in a courtroom. I sat at the wooden table, my hands folded in my lap, trying to stay calm. My fingers wouldn't stop trembling. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper, and the fluorescent lights above made everything look harsh and cold. Across from me, Brandon sat with his lawyer, a sharp-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months. Brandon looked so different from the man I married. His suit was designer, perfectly tailored. His watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist. Even his haircut screamed money. He sat there with his chin up, looking confident, almost bored. Next to me, Maggie squeezed my hand under the table. She'd been my best friend since we were kids, and now she was my lawyer too. She took my case without charging me a single dollar because she knew, she'd always known, what I'd given up for Brandon. Brandon's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smooth motion that seemed rehearsed. His voice was loud and clear as he addressed Judge Henderson, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and grey hair pulled back in a tight bun. Your Honour, my client, Dr. Brandon Pierce, has built an impressive career through his own hard work and dedication. He graduated top of his class from medical school and is now a respected cardiothoracic surgeon at Metropolitan Elite Hospital. During his marriage to Mrs. Morrison, she worked various low-skill jobs: cashier, waitress, cleaning lady, contributing minimally to the household while my client pursued his demanding education and career. I felt my stomach twist. Low-skill jobs, minimally contributing. The words felt like slaps across my face. The lawyer continued, pacing slowly. Mrs. Morrison, while pleasant enough, never pursued any meaningful career development. She has no college degree, no specialized skills, no significant assets of her own. My client is requesting that this divorce be settled swiftly, with Mrs. Morrison receiving a modest alimony payment of $1,000 monthly for 2 years. This is more than generous considering she made no direct financial investment in Dr. Pierce's education or career advancement. No direct financial investment. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. How dare he? How dare they both? I glanced at Brandon. He was nodding along with his lawyer's words, that same cold expression on his face. This was the man who used to hold me when I came home at 2 a.m, so tired I could barely stand. The man who used to kiss my rough hands and promise me that someday he'd take care of me the way I was taking care of him. Furthermore, the lawyer said, pulling out some papers, Dr. Pierce has generously offered to allow Mrs. Morrison to keep her personal belongings and her vehicle, a 2015 Honda Civic. He asks for nothing from her, as she has nothing of value to offer. He simply wishes to move forward with his life. Nothing of value to offer. Something inside me cracked when I heard those words. 6 years. 6 years of my life, my youth, my dreams. Nothing of value. I looked up at Maggie. She was staring at Brandon's lawyer with an expression that would have been scary if I didn't know her so well. She was angry. Really angry. When Brandon's lawyer finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, Maggie stood up. Your Honour, she said, her voice steady and strong, if I may present evidence that directly contradicts everything we just heard. Judge Henderson nodded. Please proceed. Maggie turned to me and gave me a small nod. This was it. The moment we'd prepared for. My hands shook as I reached down to the bag at my feet. The manila envelope felt heavy, like it contained the weight of 6 years. I stood up, my legs feeling weak, and walked toward the judge's bench. The courtroom was completely silent, except for my footsteps. I could feel Brandon's eyes on me, probably wondering what I was doing. I could feel everyone watching. When I reached Judge Henderson, I held out the envelope. She took it with a professional nod, and I walked back to my seat, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Judge Henderson opened the envelope and pulled out the documents inside. There were several pages, and I watched as her eyes moved across them, reading. At first, her expression was neutral, professional. Then something changed. Her eyebrows went up. She flipped to the next page and her eyes widened slightly. She looked up at Brandon, then back down at the papers. She read more, and suddenly, her lips pressed together like she was trying not to smile. She flipped to the last page, read it completely, and then something amazing happened. Judge Henderson started laughing, not a polite chuckle, not a quiet giggle. She actually laughed out loud, a real genuine laugh that echoed through the silent courtroom. She put her hand over her mouth, trying to control herself, but her shoulders were shaking. She looked at Brandon again, and that made her laugh even harder. I had never seen anything like it. Neither had anyone else, apparently. Brandon's confident expression crumbled. He leaned forward, confused. His lawyer looked startled, turning to whisper urgently to Brandon. In the gallery behind us, I could see Veronica Ashford, the pharmaceutical heiress, Brandon's new girlfriend, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Her perfectly made-up face showed confusion and worry. Judge Henderson wiped tears from her eyes, still smiling widely. She looked directly at Brandon, and her expression changed from amused to something harder, colder. "Mr. Pierce," she said, and her voice had an edge to it now. "In 20 years of presiding over family court, I have never, and I mean never, seen such a clear-cut case of—" She paused, looking down at the papers again, then back up at him. "Well, we'll get into the details momentarily, but I must say, your audacity is truly remarkable." Brandon's face went pale. His lawyer was frantically whispering to him. I could see Brandon shaking his head, looking confused and angry. He had no idea what was in that envelope, no idea what evidence Maggie and I had spent weeks gathering. But I knew, and sitting there, watching his confidence dissolve, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. Judge Henderson set the papers down, folded her hands, and looked around the courtroom. "I think we need to revisit some facts about this marriage, don't you? Mrs. Morrison, let's go back to the beginning. Tell me about how you and Dr. Pierce met, and what happened during those 6 years while he was in medical school." Maggie stood up beside me. "Your Honour, if I may, I'd like to walk the court through the timeline, starting 8 years ago." "Please do," Judge Henderson said, and she still had that slight smile on her face like she knew something wonderful was about to happen. "And that's when we went back to the beginning, back to when Brandon and I were different people, back to when we were young and in love and poor, living in that tiny apartment with dreams bigger than our bank account. 8 years ago, Brandon and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that was so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms out in the hallway. The paint was peeling in the bathroom, the kitchen had exactly 4 cabinets, and the bedroom window had a crack that we covered with duct tape every winter. But back then, it felt like a palace because we were together, and we were in love, and we believed in the future. Brandon was 22, I was 20, and we'd just gotten married at the courthouse with Maggie and Brandon's cousin as witnesses. We couldn't afford a real wedding. We couldn't afford much of anything, really. Brandon had just been accepted into medical school, his dream since he was a kid. But medical school cost money, lots of money, more money than either of us had ever seen. I was in my sophomore year of college, studying communications. I loved my classes. I loved learning. But one night, about 2 months after Brandon started medical school, we sat at our tiny kitchen table with bills spread out in front of us, and we both knew something had to change. "Grace," Brandon said, running his hands through his hair the way he always did when he was stressed, "I don't know how we're going to make this work. Tuition is due in 3 weeks, and even with my student loans, we're short. And we still have to pay rent, electricity, food." I looked at the numbers. I'd been looking at them for hours. Brandon's part-time job at the campus library paid almost nothing. My part-time work at the supermarket wasn't much better. His student loans covered tuition but barely touched living expenses. We were drowning and we hadn't even gotten to the deep water yet. "What if I took a year off school?" I said quietly. Brandon looked up at me, his eyes tired. What? Just 1 year? Maybe 2. I could work full-time, maybe get a second job. Once you finish medical school and start your residency, I can go back. Grace, no, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. I reached across the table and took his hand. Brandon, being a doctor is your dream. You've wanted this since you were 8 years old. Communications? I like it, but I can study that any time. You can't put medical school on hold. If you leave now, you might never go back. We stayed up all night talking about it. Brandon protested, said it wasn't fair, said he'd find another way. But we both knew there was no other way. The next week, I withdrew from college. The week after that, I got a full-time job as a cashier at Save Mart, and I picked up weekend shifts waiting tables at a diner called Mel's. Those first few months weren't too bad, honestly. I was tired, sure, but I was young and strong, and Brandon was so grateful. He'd come home from class and find me exhausted on the couch, and he'd massage my feet and tell me I was amazing. He'd help with laundry, cook dinner on weekends, and kiss me goodnight with such tenderness that I knew, absolutely knew, we were building something beautiful together. Just a few more years, he'd whisper. Then I'll take care of you. I'll give you everything, Grace. I promise. I believed him completely. But medical school wasn't 2 years. It was 4 years of constant studying, then residency after that. By Brandon's second year, my 2 jobs weren't enough anymore. His textbooks alone cost hundreds of dollars. He needed special equipment, a laptop that could handle medical imaging software, professional clothes for his clinical rotations. I picked up a 3rd job cleaning offices at night from 8 until midnight 4 days a week. My schedule became brutal. Wake up at 5 in the morning, get ready, work the cashier counter from 7 until 2. Come home, nap for an hour if I was lucky, then clean offices from 4 until 8. 3 nights a week, I'd go straight from cleaning to the diner, waitressing until 2 in the morning. I'd get home, shower, sleep for 3 hours, and start over again. My body started showing the strain. My hands got rough and calloused from cleaning chemicals and carrying heavy trays. I lost weight because I was too tired to eat properly. I'd grab whatever was quick, crackers, cheap ramen, sometimes just coffee. The dark circles under my eyes became permanent. My college friends stopped calling because I never had time to see them anyway. But Brandon was doing well. Really well. He was at the top of his class, impressing his professors, getting excellent marks in his clinical rotations. And he still loved me. Or at least I thought he did. He still said thank you when I handed him money for his textbooks. He still held me at night when we both finally made it to bed. The cracks started showing in his 3rd year. Brandon got accepted into a prestigious residency program, and suddenly he was around different people. Wealthy people. His classmates came from families with money, families who could pay for medical school without blinking. Their wives and girlfriends wore nice clothes, got their hair done at salons, talked about art galleries and wine tastings. One night, Brandon came home from a study group and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. I was in my Save Mart uniform, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eating cereal for dinner because I was too exhausted to cook. Grace, he said slowly, why don't you ever dress up anymore? I looked down at myself confused. I just got off an 8-hour shift. I have to be at the office building in an hour to clean. I know, but don't you want to look nice sometimes? For yourself? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Brandon, I barely have time to sleep. When would I dress up? And for what? To scrub toilets? He didn't say anything else that night, but the comment stuck with me. I started noticing other little things. The way he'd turn away slightly when I tried to kiss him goodbye in the morning, like my Save Mart vest embarrassed him. The way he stopped inviting me to medical school events, the way he'd suggest I maybe take better care of myself. During his 4th year, the comments got worse. He started comparing me to other people without even realizing it. Jeremy's girlfriend just started her own business consulting company. She's really impressive. Or, did you see what Dr. Sanders' wife was wearing at the graduation preview? That's the kind of elegance that really stands out. I tried. God, I really tried. I bought cheap makeup from the drugstore and watched YouTube tutorials at 3 in the morning, trying to learn how to look elegant. I saved tips for 2 months to buy one nice dress. I borrowed library books about current events so I could have intelligent conversations when Brandon occasionally let me attend his functions. But I was still working 3 jobs. I was still exhausted. And no amount of cheap makeup could hide the bone-deep tiredness in my eyes. The worst part? Brandon stopped noticing my sacrifices. He stopped saying thank you when I handed him money. He stopped helping around the apartment. His studies were too important, he said. He started sleeping in the spare room because my alarm for my 5 a.m. shifts disturbed him. The man who used to massage my tired feet now barely looked at them. Brandon's graduation day arrived on a sunny Saturday in May. I sat in the auditorium with hundreds of other people, watching as medical students walked across the stage in their caps and gowns to receive their diplomas. When they called Brandon's name, Dr. Brandon Pierce, I stood up and cheered louder than anyone else in that room. Tears streamed down my face. 6 years. 6 years of working myself into the ground had led to this moment. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the courtyard. I'd spent 2 weeks' worth of tips on a simple navy blue dress and a pair of low heels from a discount store. I'd done my hair and makeup carefully that morning, using tutorials I'd memorized. I wanted to look nice for Brandon. I wanted him to be proud of me, the way I was proud of him. I found Brandon surrounded by his classmates and their families. Everyone was laughing, taking photos, celebrating. I walked up and touched his arm gently. "Congratulations, Dr. Pierce," I said, smiling up at him. He turned, and for just a second, barely a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not happiness or love. Something else. Something that looked almost like embarrassment. "Grace, hey," he said, his voice flat. He didn't hug me, didn't kiss me. Just turned back to his conversation. "Everyone, this is my wife, Grace." A tall, elegant woman in a cream-coloured suit extended her hand to me. Her nails were perfectly manicured, painted a soft pink. "Veronica Ashford," she said, her smile bright and cool. "I work in hospital administration at Metropolitan Elite. We've been trying to recruit Brandon for months." "Oh," I said, shaking her hand. My own nails were bare and short, the skin around them rough from cleaning chemicals. "That's wonderful." "Brandon is incredibly talented," Veronica continued, not really looking at me, but at Brandon. "We need brilliant surgeons like him. The salary package we're offering is extremely competitive." Another classmate, a guy named Thomas, joined the conversation with his wife, a woman in a designer dress who I'd overheard earlier talking about their recent trip to Paris. "Pierce, you're set for life, man. Elite salary plus the reputation. You'll be unstoppable." Thomas's wife smiled at me, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you must be so relieved, Grace. Brandon told us you've been working while he was in school. Retail, wasn't it? You must be exhausted." The way she said retail made it sound like something dirty. "I worked several jobs," I said quietly, whatever was needed. "How charming," she said, and turned back to Veronica to discuss some restaurant I'd never heard of. I stood there for another 20 minutes, invisible in my discount dress, while Brandon talked and laughed with people who belonged to a world I couldn't enter. Finally, I touched his arm again. "Brandon, I'm going to head home. I have a shift at the diner tonight." He frowned. "Tonight?" "It's my graduation day." "I know, I'm sorry, but I couldn't get anyone to cover, and we need the money." "We need the money," he repeated, but his tone was strange. "Grace, I'm about to start making 6 figures. Do you really need to keep waitressing?" I stared at him. 6 years of 3 jobs, 6 years of 4 hours of sleep, 6 years of sacrificing everything. And he was asking if I really needed to work. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Until your first paycheck clears and we know we're stable, yes, I need to work." He sighed like I was being difficult. "Fine, I'll probably be out late anyway. Veronica invited a bunch of us to some celebration dinner." "Veronica invited you?" "Us. A group of us. Networking, Grace. It's important for my career. I went home alone and put on my diner uniform. That night, I served coffee and burgers to people who tipped poorly, and I thought about Brandon at some expensive restaurant with Veronica Ashford, talking about things I couldn't understand. 3 weeks later, Brandon got the job at Metropolitan Elite Hospital. His starting salary was $200,000 a year. When he told me, I cried with relief. Finally, I could quit at least one job, maybe two. Maybe I could go back to school and finish my degree. But Brandon had different plans. He came home one evening with brochures for luxury apartments. "We need to move," he said, spreading them across our scratched kitchen table. "This place isn't appropriate for someone in my position. My colleagues all live in the River District. That's where we should be." I looked at the brochures. The rent on the cheapest apartment was $4,000 a month, more than I made in 3 months at all my jobs combined. "Brandon, that's so expensive. Maybe we could find something nice but more affordable? Then I could quit working and go back to school." He looked at me like I'd suggested something ridiculous. "Grace, image matters in my field. Where we live, what we drive, how we present ourselves, it all matters. Besides, it's good for you to keep working. Independence is important." Independence. That's what he called it now. We moved to a luxury apartment in the River District. Brandon bought a BMW and expensive suits. He joined a gym that cost $300 a month. He got his hair cut at a salon that charged more than I made in a week of waitressing. And I kept working my 2 jobs. I'd quit the cleaning job, at least, paying my share of our life while watching Brandon transform into someone I barely recognized. The comments became constant. "Grace, why don't you do something with your hair? Grace, that shirt is really worn out. Grace, maybe you should read the news more. You never know what's happening in the world. Grace, I can't take you to the hospital fundraiser. You wouldn't fit in." Every criticism felt like a knife. I was the same woman who'd worked herself half to death for him. The same woman who'd given up her education, her youth, her dreams. But now I wasn't enough. I was too simple, too plain, too unsophisticated. Veronica's name came up constantly. Veronica organized the charity auction. Veronica said the funniest thing at lunch. Veronica summers in the Hamptons. Veronica understands the professional world. I tried to bring it up once. "Brandon, you talk about Veronica a lot." His face darkened. "She's a colleague, Grace, a professional contact. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're insecure and paranoid. You don't understand how the professional world works. This is why I can't bring you to events. You're too small-minded." Small-minded. After everything I'd sacrificed, I was small-minded for noticing my husband's obsession with another woman. Our 8th wedding anniversary fell on a Tuesday in October. I'd been planning for weeks, saving every spare dollar from my tips. I wanted one perfect evening, one night where we could remember who we used to be before medical school and luxury apartments and Veronica Ashford. I left my cashier shift early, losing half a day's pay so I could prepare. I bought ingredients for Brandon's favorite meal, chicken parmesan, the same dish I used to make in our tiny apartment when we were happy. I found candles at the dollar store and set them on our dining table. I wore the navy dress from his graduation, the nicest thing I owned, and I'd spent an hour on my hair and makeup. The table looked beautiful, simple but beautiful. I'd even bought a small cake from the bakery, chocolate his favorite. I kept checking my phone. Brandon's shift at the hospital ended at 6. It was 6:30, then 7, then 7:30. At 8 o'clock, I texted him, "Are you coming home soon? I made dinner." At 8:30, he replied, "Stuck at hospital. Emergency consultation." My heart sank, but I understood. He was a surgeon. Emergencies happened. I covered the food with foil and kept the candles lit. At 9:45, the apartment door opened. Brandon walked in, but he wasn't wearing his scrubs or his white coat. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, and he smelled like cologne and something else, perfume that wasn't mine. "Hey," he said, barely glancing at me as he walked past the dining table toward the bedroom. "Brandon," I said softly, "I made dinner. It's our anniversary." He stopped walking and turned around like he'd forgotten I was there. His eyes moved over the table, the candles now burned halfway down, the covered dishes, the cake with happy anniversary written in blue icing. "Grace, I told you I was stuck at the hospital." "You're wearing a suit," I said, "not scrubs." His jaw tightened. "I had to change for a meeting afterward. A professional obligation." "On our anniversary? You couldn't tell them you had plans." "Some things are more important than dinner, Grace. More important than our anniversary. More important than 8 years of marriage." I felt something crack inside my chest. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "just sit with me for a few minutes. The food's still warm, we can—" "I'm not hungry," he interrupted. "I ate already. At the meeting." He walked to the bedroom. I stood there in my dollar store dress, looking at the table I'd prepared with such hope. The candles flickered. The food was getting cold. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. I followed him to the bedroom. He was changing into casual clothes, his back to me. "Brandon, we need to talk." "Not now, Grace. I'm exhausted." "We never talk anymore. You're always at the hospital or out with colleagues or—" "Or what?" He spun around, his voice sharp. "Say it. You think I'm doing something wrong? I think you're forgetting about us, about our marriage, about everything we've been through together." He laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Everything we've been through. Grace, I'm the one who went through medical school. I'm the one who studied for years, who works 16-hour shifts, who's actually building a career. What have you done? You punched a clock. You served coffee. That's not sacrifice. That's just having a job." The words hit me like physical blows. "I worked 3 jobs so you could study. I gave up my education. I gave up everything." "No one asked you to." His voice was loud now, angry. "That was your choice, Grace. Your decision. I never forced you to drop out of school. You made yourself into a martyr, and now you want me to be grateful forever? That's not how life works." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This man, this stranger in expensive clothes standing in our bedroom, couldn't be the same person who used to hold me and promise me forever. "Brandon," I whispered, "what happened to you?" He sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. When he looked up at me, his eyes were cold, distant. "I grew up, Grace. I evolved. I'm not that scared kid in a cramped apartment anymore. I'm a surgeon at one of the best hospitals in the country. I have colleagues who respect me, opportunities opening up, a future that's actually going somewhere. And you?" He paused, looking at me in my simple dress, with my simple hair, and my tired face. "You're still the same girl from 8 years ago. You haven't grown, you haven't changed, you're still working at Save Mart, still waiting tables, still living like we're poor when we're not anymore. I'm working those jobs to help us save money, to contribute." "I don't need your contribution." He stood up, his voice rising again. "I don't need your discount store clothes or your homemade dinners or your constant tired face reminding me of where I came from. Do you know what Veronica said to me last week? She said I seemed weighed down, like I was carrying something heavy. And she's right. I am carrying something heavy. This marriage. You, Veronica. Always Veronica." "Are you sleeping with her?" I asked, the question falling from my lips before I could stop it. "Does it matter?" he shot back. "Would it change anything? Grace, look at yourself. Look at your hands, your clothes, your entire life. You're stuck in the past while I'm moving toward the future. Veronica understands ambition. She understands success. She belongs in my world. And you?" He shook his head slowly. "You don't." I stood there frozen as he walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. "What are you doing?" I asked, though I already knew. "I've been thinking about this for months," he said, starting to pack clothes. "We're not compatible anymore. We want different things. We're different people now." "Because I'm not rich? Because I'm not sophisticated enough for your new friends?" He stopped packing and looked at me directly. "Because your simplicity disgusts me, Grace. The way you think, the way you dress, the way you live. It's all so small and limited and beneath what I deserve now. You're not worthy of the life I've built. Not worthy. After 6 years of sacrifice, after giving up everything, after loving him with every piece of my heart, I wasn't worthy." "I want a divorce," he said, zipping up his suitcase. "My lawyer will contact you with the details. You can stay here for another month while you figure out where to go. After that, I'm selling the place." He walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Grace, I did appreciate what you did. Back then. But that was a long time ago, and gratitude doesn't build a future. I'm sorry you can't see that." Then he left. I stood alone in our bedroom, hearing the front door close, hearing his footsteps fade down the hallway. The candles in the dining room had burned out. The anniversary dinner sat untouched, and 8 years of my life had just walked out the door, taking my heart with it. The days after Brandon left blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I went to work, came home, stared at the walls. I didn't cry at first. I think I was too shocked, too empty. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human, leaving just a hollow shell that knew how to scan groceries and pour coffee. Brandon's lawyer sent papers 2 weeks later. I sat on the couch, our couch that I'd helped pay for, and read through the terms. I got nothing. A tiny settlement of $15,000 out of generosity. No claim to the apartment, no claim to his retirement accounts or investments. No claim to anything we'd built together because, according to the legal words on the page, I hadn't built anything. I'd just been there. The lawyer's letter used phrases like "no substantial financial contribution" and "lack of professional development during marriage" and "equitable distribution based on individual assets." Every phrase was a knife. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror that night. I was 28 years old, but looked older. My hands were permanently rough, the skin dry and cracked no matter how much lotion I used. My shoulders curved forward from exhaustion. My eyes had lost their light. I'd given the best years of my life to a man who'd thrown me away like garbage. For the first time since Brandon left, I broke down completely. I slid to the bathroom floor and sobbed, deep, ugly, painful sobs that came from somewhere dark inside me. I cried for the girl who'd believed in love. I cried for the sacrifices that meant nothing. I cried for 6 years of my life I'd never get back. That's where Maggie found me 3 hours later. She'd used her emergency key when I didn't answer her calls. She took one look at me on that bathroom floor and sat down beside me, pulling me into her arms. "He's destroying you," she said quietly. "We can't let him win, Grace." "There's nothing to win, Maggie. Look at me. No degree, no career, no savings. He's right, I have nothing." Maggie pulled back and grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. "You have the truth. And the truth is powerful." Over the next 3 weeks, Maggie worked like she was possessed. She became my lawyer officially, taking my case without charging me a penny. "You'll pay me back someday when you're back on your feet," she said. "Right now we have work to do." She requested my bank records from the past 8 years, every single statement, every deposit, every withdrawal. She got our apartment lease agreements, all 5 of them from our different places, each one signed only by me because Brandon's credit was terrible from student loans. She tracked down receipts I'd saved in boxes, textbooks, medical equipment, supplies, all purchased by me. Then she found something I'd almost forgotten about. "Grace," she said one evening, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with her laptop open. "Do you remember Brandon's 3rd year of medical school? When his tuition was due and his student loan didn't come through in time?" I nodded slowly. That had been a terrible month. Brandon was panicking, about to lose his spot in the program. "You took out a personal loan," Maggie said. $45,000 in your name only. You gave it all to Brandon for tuition and expenses. Do you still have the paperwork?" My heart started beating faster. I think so. In the storage closet, maybe? We tore through boxes until we found it. A personal loan agreement from First National Bank in my name. And beneath it, another document. A promissory note Brandon had signed, acknowledging the loan and promising to repay me once he finished his residency and got a job. Maggie held up the paper, her eyes gleaming. He forgot about this, didn't he? I think so. That was 4 years ago. Once he got his hospital job, he never mentioned it. Because he forgot. But legally, this document is gold, Grace. This proves direct financial investment in his education. This changes everything. Over the next week, Maggie built our case like she was constructing a building, piece by piece. The loan documents. My bank statements showing I paid 100% of our living expenses for 6 years while Brandon contributed nothing. Testimony from our old landlords and neighbours who remembered me working constantly. Text messages from years ago where Brandon thanked me for my sacrifices and promised to make it right. Then Maggie subpoenaed Brandon's financial records, and we found something that made my stomach turn. 3 months before Brandon asked for divorce, he'd transferred $75,000 to Veronica Ashford's business account. The memo line said, "Investment in Ash Pharmaceuticals startup." He used marital money, Maggie explained. Money earned during your marriage to invest in his girlfriend's company. That's not just infidelity, Grace. That's financial betrayal, misuse of marital assets. The judge is going to care about this. A lot. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Maggie had explained the strategy. We weren't just defending against Brandon's divorce terms. We were going on offense. We were going to show Judge Henderson exactly who built Dr. Brandon Pierce's success. What if it doesn't work? I asked Maggie. What if the judge thinks I'm just bitter? Maggie smiled. Trust me. When judges see evidence this clear, they react. And Judge Henderson? She's famous for not tolerating people who forget where they came from. The morning of the hearing, I put on the same navy dress I'd worn to Brandon's graduation. Not because it was nice, but because I wanted to remind him. I wanted him to see the woman he'd found disgusting, the woman he'd called unworthy, standing up for herself. Maggie handed me the manila envelope in the courthouse hallway. Inside was everything. The loan documents, the promissory note, the bank statements, the evidence of his transfer to Veronica, witness statements, everything. When the moment is right, she said, you give this to Judge Henderson. And Grace, keep your head up. You've already won, even if you don't know it yet. We walked into that courtroom together, and I sat at the table with my hands folded, trying to breathe. Brandon sat across from me looking confident and untouchable in his expensive suit. His lawyer talked about my low-skilled jobs and my minimal contribution, and how Brandon deserved to keep everything he'd earned. And then Maggie nodded at me. I stood up, walked to Judge Henderson's bench and handed her the envelope that would change everything. My hands shook, but I didn't fall. I walked back to my seat and waited. I watched Judge Henderson's face change as she read, watched her eyebrows rise, watched her lips press together, watched the moment she understood exactly what Brandon had done. And then I watched her laugh. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I watched Judge Henderson laugh, and for a moment time stopped. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom, a real, genuine laugh that made everyone freeze. Brandon's confident expression crumbled. His lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically. In the gallery, Veronica shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured hands gripping her designer purse. Judge Henderson wiped her eyes and composed herself, but she was still smiling. When she spoke, her voice had an edge that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Pierce," she said, looking directly at Brandon, "in 20 years of presiding over family court, I have never seen such a clear-cut case of deliberate misrepresentation. Your lawyer stood in my courtroom and claimed your wife made no direct financial investment in your education. Would you like to explain this?" She held up the promissory note, the document Brandon had signed 4 years ago, promising to repay the $45,000 I'd loaned him. Brandon's face went white. That was years ago. A personal matter between my wife and me. A personal matter. Judge Henderson's eyebrows rose. This is a legally binding promissory note, Mr. Pierce. Your wife took out a loan in her name, risking her own credit, her own financial future, to pay for your medical school tuition. You signed a document acknowledging this debt and promising repayment. That's not personal. That's financial fact. Brandon's lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, even if this loan exists, it's separate from the question of marital assets. Sit down, Judge Henderson said, and her voice left no room for argument. The lawyer sat. She continued reading from the documents, and with every page, Brandon sank lower in his chair. She read aloud from my bank statements, showing 6 years of deposits from my 3 jobs and withdrawals for rent, utilities, groceries, medical textbooks, equipment, all while Brandon contributed nothing. She read the old text messages where Brandon thanked me for my sacrifices and promised to take care of me someday. Then she got to the last section, and her expression changed from amused to disgusted. Mr. Pierce, 3 months before filing for divorce, you transferred $75,000 of marital funds to Ms. Veronica Ashford for her pharmaceutical startup. Is that correct? Brandon glanced back at Veronica in the gallery. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. It was an investment, Brandon said. A business decision. A business decision made with marital assets without your wife's knowledge or consent, Judge Henderson said. That's called financial infidelity, Mr. Pierce. And in this court, it matters. She set down the papers and folded her hands, looking at Brandon with an expression I'd never forget. Pure contempt. Let me make sure I understand the situation, she said slowly. Your wife dropped out of college to support you. She worked 3 jobs simultaneously for 6 years, paying 100% of your living expenses. She took out a personal loan of $45,000 to cover your tuition when your student loans fell short. She sacrificed her education, her health, her youth, everything, so you could become a doctor. And when you finally succeeded, when you finally had money and status and a future, you decided she wasn't worthy of you anymore. You called her simple. You called her disgusting. You gave $75,000 of her money to another woman. And now you stand in my courtroom asking me to give your wife almost nothing. She paused, letting the silence fill the room. Mr. Pierce, your arrogance is breathtaking. Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Henderson held up her hand. Here is my ruling. First, you will repay the $45,000 loan plus 6 years of compound interest, totaling $63,000. Second, Mrs. Morrison is entitled to 50% of all marital assets acquired during the marriage, including half the value of your home, half your retirement accounts, and half your investments. Third, because Mrs. Bay Morrison sacrificed her education and earning potential to support your career, she is awarded compensatory spousal support of $4,000 monthly for 6 years, the equivalent of what she could have earned with the college degree she gave up for you. Fourth, the $75,000 you transferred to Ms. Ashford must be returned to the marital estate and divided equally. She looked at Brandon one more time. By my calculation, your wife walks away with approximately $450,000 plus ongoing support. You, Mr. Pierce, walk away with a lesson I hope you remember. Success built on someone else's sacrifice isn't yours alone. You owe her everything, and you gave her nothing. This court is correcting that. Brandon exploded out of his chair. This is insane. She was just a cashier. She didn't pass the exams. She didn't do the surgeries. She made it possible. Judge Henderson slammed her gavel so hard I felt the vibration through the table. Every hour she worked, every dollar she earned, every dream she gave up, that's what built your career. The fact that you can't see that proves exactly why she's better off without you. We're adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Brandon's lawyer was talking rapidly, but Brandon wasn't listening. He was staring at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before: fear. the fear of a man who'd just lost control of everything. I stood up on shaking legs, and Maggie hugged me tight. "You did it," she whispered. "You did it, Grace." Outside the courtroom, I heard raised voices. Brandon and Veronica were arguing on the steps. "You told me she was nobody." Veronica's voice was sharp, furious. "You said this would be simple, that she'd just go away. Now I have to return $75,000. Do you know how that looks for my company? Veronica, please, we can figure this out." "Figure it out yourself. I'm not attaching my name to this disaster." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone steps. Brandon called after her, but she didn't look back. His lawyer approached him, speaking quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Brandon's face fall even further, probably telling him that an appeal would cost more than just paying the judgment. Brandon stood alone on the courthouse steps, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. The confident surgeon who'd walked into that courtroom an hour ago was gone. In his place was just a man who'd forgotten where he came from and lost everything because of it. 6 months later, I was sitting in a college classroom for the first time in 8 years. I'd enrolled in the business administration program at the community college, and I was loving every minute of it. My first semester grades came back, straight A's and a spot on the dean's list. I'd paid off all my debts. I'd rented a small but comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost during those exhausting years, and for the first time in forever, I actually looked healthy. I even got my hair done at a real salon. Not an expensive one, but nice enough. I felt like myself again. No, that's not right. I felt like a better version of myself. Stronger, clearer, more sure of who I was and what I deserved. Maggie met me for coffee to celebrate my Dean's List achievement. We sat in a little cafe near campus and she couldn't stop smiling at me. "Look at you," she said. "Grace Morrison, college student and future business mogul," I laughed. "I don't know about mogul, but I'm thinking about getting my MBA eventually. Maybe starting something of my own someday." "You will. I know you will." She stirred her coffee, then looked at me seriously. "How are you feeling? Really?" I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, better than I have in years. For so long, I measured my worth by what I could do for Brandon, by how much I could sacrifice, how much I could give up, how small I could make myself so he could be big. And when he left, I thought I had nothing. But I was wrong. I looked down at my hands, still a little rough but healing. I had myself. I just forgot that mattered. Walking home from the cafe, I passed Metropolitan Elite Hospital. Through the big glass windows, I could see doctors and nurses moving through the lobby. Somewhere in there, Brandon was working, wearing his white coat, looking successful from the outside. I stopped for just a moment. Not because I missed him, not because I was angry. I stopped because I realized I felt nothing, no pain, no bitterness, no longing for what we used to have, just peace, just freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email from the university. I'd been awarded a scholarship for non-traditional students who'd overcome hardship to return to education. Full tuition for next year. I smiled, put my phone away, and kept walking toward my apartment. Toward my future. Toward a life where I was finally investing in myself instead of someone who didn't deserve it. I spent 6 years building someone else's dream. Now it was time to build my own. And this time, the foundation was solid, because it was built on my own worth, not someone else's approval. That was enough. That was everything.